There were so many vehicles that Hasbro could have given us in the 80s for the G.I. Joe line. Like, and I'm talking absolute bangers. Let's check them out. G'day everyone, welcome back to Frostbite's G.I. Joe Repro. So you guys know that I love analysing the toys, comics and cartoons from the history of G.I. Joe. And if you watch this channel occasionally, you'll also know that because I've served in the Australian military, a large point of my life, also love adding a bit of that real world flavour to my videos sometimes. Today's video, it's a big one for me. I've been thinking about this one for a while, and it sort of excites me a fair bit talking about these sweet ass military vehicles. We're going to take a look at real world military vehicles that served in the Vietnam War, but for some reason they didn't make their way into G.I. Joe toy ranks. As far as I know, the comics or the cartoons either. We all know that Larry Hama served in the Vietnam War, and I know he doesn't watch my videos, but if he did, I would thank him for his service. We've seen how his service affected the creation of characters and story plots in the G.I. Joe universe. And really, like I couldn't think of it turning out any better. I like thinking about things that we could have done and had a little bit of that alternate universe thing going on. So yeah, strap in. Let's take a look at some military hardware that would have made amazing toys in the G.I. Joe toy line during the 1980s. All right, let's talk about, first up, a vehicle that is just absolutely screaming G.I. Joe, but somehow never made it into the line. So we're talking about the UH-1 Huey. To me, if you think about Vietnam era warfare, this helicopter is the image that comes to mind. I think of troops being lifted into battle, medevacs rushing wounded out, the sound of those rotor blades cutting through the jungle. It's just so iconic. When you compare that to the G.I. Joe line, it feels like Hasbro actually left money on the table by not giving this one. Now, picture this in toy form as well. A medium-sized helicopter, just a bit larger than the Dragonfly, with two big sliding doors on the sides. Imagine opening those up and being able to fit 4 or 5 Joes in the back, ready to rappel down ropes, or imagine side-mounted M60s. Maybe one door could be kitted out with a stretcher for medics like Doc or Lifeline. Could have had interchangeable play patterns, like your troop carrier, your gunship, or your medevac. And that's the kind of versatility that kids back then, which that's us, that's you, me, we just would have gone wild for that shit. Honestly, the Huey would have fit the aesthetic of the Joe line just absolutely perfectly. The original toy line gave us some wild vehicles, but it was always rooted in real world military hardware. And I think we all know that. Just sometimes it's hard to actually tell where that where that stuff originated from sometimes. But the UH-1 bridges that gap. It's grounded in history, but with endless opportunities for playtime. I can picture in my head, box art has Duke and Scarlet hanging out the side doors, roadblock behind the M60, Snake Eyes fast roping down into battle. Just tell me that wouldn't have been an instant classic on the shelf next to the Sky Striker and the Dragonfly. Now, for me, the Huey is one of those vehicles that not only belongs in G.I. Joe, but it almost feels like we're just missing it all along. This vehicle is, when I thought of doing this video, this is exactly the vehicle that I was just so confused as to why we never saw it in the toy line. Now, look at the manufacturer of this helo, and it's Bell helicopters. When we think about Vietnam era vehicles that could have slotted perfectly into the G.I. Joe line, it's easy to jump straight to the Huey, but let's take a step back and look at the company that brought the icon to life. Because Bell's story just isn't about a single aircraft, it's about a manufacturer that helped reshape modern warfare and also left a mark on history that still echoes even today. Bell started out in the 1930s as Bell Aircraft, making experimental planes, and by the mid 1940s, they were already pushing into rotorcraft design. By the time the US was deep into Vietnam, Bell had become synonymous with helicopters. Their biggest contribution, of course, was the UH-1 Iroquois. We know that as the Huey, but that wasn't their only player on the battlefield. Bell kept innovating and delivered the AH-1 Cobra. It was the world's first dedicated attack helo, which became a vital partner to the Huey in combat zones. Now, that combination, utility transports and gunships, it changed how the US Army fought, moved, and survived. And when I talk about that AH-1, you know it, you love it. It's what the Dragonfly was based off. So don't get confused by the numbers or the letters that I'm spitting at you. There's some really nice aircraft that G.I. Joe did base its stuff off, but you may just not know the original aircraft. Now, what makes Bell stand out is they didn't just build one prolific model and call it a day. They pioneered turbine-powered helicopters. They mass-produced them in numbers never seen before at the time, and they proved that helicopters weren't just support vehicles. They were the beating heart of modern mobility and warfare. Now, between troop insertions, medical evacuations, close air support, and reconnaissance, Bell's designs gave the US a level of flexibility that no other manufacturer could match at the time. So if I'm putting on my G.I. Joe collector hat, Bell isn't just a one-vehicle wonder. Their engineering opened the door to a whole era of rotary wing aircraft that could have inspired an entire subline of Joe toys. Imagine the catalogue, not only showing a Huey-style transport, but also a slim attack chopper based on the Cobra, packaged together as a battle set. That would have been true to what Bell helicopters represented in Vietnam. Innovation, adaptability, and an undeniable presence across the battlefield. Now, let's break down what made the Huey such a beast. Because this wasn't just another helicopter. This thing was the workhorse of a generation. It was powered by a single turboshaft engine. The Huey could haul a full squad of troops plus gear and still have the guts to lift off in the brutal jungle heat. Now, if you go back and you take a look at why a lot of crashes occurred with aircraft, I think particularly with a Chinook, that was a bit of a problem back then. The US, not an expert, the US took a whole bunch of aircraft over there, but hadn't pre-tested them for the heat, humidity, and just general conditions that come with having a whole bunch of trees and dirt and stuff around. It's always fine to be testing these aircraft in nice, clean conditions on a runway, but yeah, I think that turned out to be a bit more of a shit fight than the initial planners thought was going to happen. So anyway, for those guys on the ground, it meant you could drop into a fight fast. When things went bad, the Huey had the muscle to haul you out just as quick. If you've seen the Huey or the Iroquois in nearly every war movie about Vietnam, you'll see it's always dropping off troops, picking up troops, dropping off troops, picking up troops. It was just like a ridiculous workhorse during that time. Top speed for this guy was pushing apparently around 135 miles an hour, which doesn't sound wild compared to jets, but for a bird carrying 10 to 12 men with doors open, M60s on the side just blazing away, that's absolute lightning. And speaking of firepower, when you did kit it out, a Huey could run dual M60s, rocket pods, grenade launchers, and a whole bunch of other things, turning it from a taxi into a flying fortress. Now, that versatility was the secret sauce. One day it's bringing in reinforcements, the next it's a medevac, pulling wounded out under fire, and by nightfall it's landing on rockets to clear out an LZ. What makes the Huey cool to me, though, is even decades later, it wasn't designed to be flashy. It was designed to get the job done. It was the workhorse, and it did it in style. You remember the sound of those rotors? It's just that unmistakable whoop, 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 whoop. It was the soundtrack of Vietnam. If you were a soldier out there, I reckon that sound would have meant hope. And from a toy perspective, it's just instant magic. It's a vehicle that every kid could imagine doing everything, because in real life, it did everything. Now, talking about the typical missions for this thing, the Huey wasn't just a helicopter, it was every helicopter. It wore many hats and more hats than any other vehicle in the war at the time. And that's what made it legendary. At its core, the Iroquois was a troop transport. It could drop a full squad of infantry right into the jungle. Doors open, guns at the ready. And that quick strike mobility turned the US Army into an air mobile force almost overnight. Whole battles were fought and won because Hueys could move men faster than trucks or jeeps ever could in that area. But that was just the start. The medevac role, codenamed Dust Off. I had to go and check this out. I had not heard of Dust Off before. Become one of the most important missions of the war. Iroquois evacuated over 90,000 wounded soldiers during that time, and often flying into hot landing zones under fire. And for the guys on the ground, that whoop, whoop, whoop of the rotor wasn't just noise. It was the sound of a lifeline coming through the tree line. And then there was the gunship role. Hueys fitted with M60 machine guns, rocket pods, and grenade launchers become what was called Huey Hogs. Flying fire bases that could soften up an LZ before the troops even come in. These birds weren't built to be attack helicopters, but they were tough enough to carry the load until Bell's own Cobra showed up later in the war. Cargo runs, resupply drops, command and control, you name it, the Iroquois did it. It was a Swiss Army knife for the Vietnam War, racking up over 7,000 aircraft deployed and millions of flight hours. It's why so many veterans say it was the sound of their war. And if we're looking through the G.I. Joe lens, that versatility is exactly why this bird, it should have been in the toy line to start with. It's not just a vehicle, it's all the vehicles rolled into one. So if we're looking at Cobra or Joe's with this one, what do you guys reckon? To me, if it was released in the G.I. Joe line, there's no doubt in my mind it would have been a Joe vehicle. The Joe team always leaned into real-world military hardware, and the Huey's about as real and as iconic as it gets. It's the kind of utility bird that fits right next to the Dragonfly or the Sky Striker, adding that gritty authenticity that the line thrived on. Now, the important thing is who would pilot this thing. I think Wild Bill is the obvious choice. He was the Joe Chopper guy, already flying the Dragonfly. But the Iroquois is versatile enough that you could easily picture lift ticket at the stick, running combat drops with the same confidence that he brought to the Tomahawk. And here's the cool part. With its medevac history, it could even work lifeline or dock right into the play pattern, sliding a stretcher into the back of that thing as part of a rescue mission. And that's exactly the kind of imaginative crossover that Hasbro could have leaned on. One vehicle supporting multiple characters, multiple missions. From a toy design perspective, the Huey could have had removable rocket pods, the sliding doors, maybe even working winch like we saw on the Tomahawk. And the box art, I can see it. Duke and Roadblock braced in the side doors with M60s, Scarlet leaning out with a crossbow, and as I said earlier, Snake Eyes just fast roping down into that jungle. It's not just a helicopter on a shelf, it's an instant playset. And it's the kind of toy that every kid in the 80s would have begged to see under the Christmas tree. Now, this next one, when I talk about, I can't believe the Iroquois wasn't made, this one is right up there. Now, I'm talking about the OH6 Cayuse Loach. Uh, we sort of know it these days as the AH6 or the little bird. It is now, when you see movies and like watch Lioness and you see them getting their drop on or getting a little bit of fire support from a helo. It's one of these things. It's what they call the little bird. So picture this, right? A tiny egg-shaped scout chopper zips low over the treetops, drawing enemy fire, or slipping into a tight jungle clearing to drop off recon Joes, or pull them out on a wire. That's the Loach. Small, fast, fearless. If the Huey was the muscle, the Loach was the eyes and nerves of the G.I. Joe line. It's perfect for recon, extraction, and high stakes stealth missions. It's the kind of compact and absolutely badass vehicle joke that collectors would have gone nuts for. Now, this thing was built by Hughes Helicopters and later become McDonnell Douglas, now MD Helicopters. The Loach was born from a light observation helicopter, or LOH, competition. Hughes broke through with this nimble marvel, winning the Army's contract and delivering a helicopter so agile and crash-worthy, it redefined scouting in the helicopter age. The design didn't just matter for Vietnam, it laid the groundwork for the AH-6 little birds that we see they get used so much by the special forces even today. So that's a lineage stretching from the jungles of Nam to modern day global missions. As for the capabilities of this thing, don't let its size fool you. The Loach can sprint up to 150 miles per hour. It's faster than most heavier choppers, whilst darting through foliage and dodging fire. Its agility comes from a teardrop fuselage, four-blade rotor, and crash-resistant structure. It can carry a pilot plus observers, or about 1,000 pounds of cargo. Modified versions like the AH-6 or the Little Bird could pack miniguns, rockets, even small missiles, all while looking like it should have been home in a cartoon toy lineup. There's just something endlessly cool about a helicopter that punches way above its weight. Now, in Vietnam, Loaches were the tip of the spear. They flew scout and hunter killer flights, sweeping low and fast to flush out enemy positions and mark them for other birds or gunships to take down. These were just some of the riskiest jobs in the war. Pilots joked, if you have to crash, do it in the Loach, because they survived hits and crashes more often than not. These things ran recon, inserted tiny teams, or snatched pilots out of tight jungles. It's that kind of fearless, frontline operation. And that's as Joe as it gets. Now, here's where the Loach one-ups the Huey. Despite its 60s origins, it's still relevant today. We see upgraded variants serving with the US Army's famed Night Stalkers, deployed in counter-terrorism ops and raids well into the 21st century. And that longevity tells you how solid this original design was. And it gives it an edge that fans would recognize instantly. It's a timeless combat fox, not a relic. Now, the Loach absolutely lands in G.I. Joe's corner. But here's a twist that taps into an underused piece of the line's lore. And I absolutely loved thinking about this. The Sky Patrol subline. So while Sky Patrol debuted in 1990 as, this metallic stealth redeco, its roots were tied to paratrooper and high altitude recon missions, drawing on Vietnam era special ops vibes. The Loach slotting in as a Sky Patrol support chopper makes perfect sense. It bridges that old world reconnaissance feel of the Loach with Sky Patrol's futuristic sheen. Now, pilot-wise, imagine a reimagined Skydive or Airborne. It's characters that were already branded as Sky Patrol figures anyway. and getting retroactively minted into the Vietnam reel as Loach pilots would just be too much for me. Airborne's hoodie and mask look, it adds mystery, while Skydive's veteran optics feels perfect for the jungle canopy. Throw in a new figure or repaint named maybe Loach Patrol or Jungle Hawk, and you got a solid blend of the 90s toy nostalgia and obviously the Vietnam era roots. Now imagine unboxing it. The Loach is a small enough vehicle that it feels sleek and collectible, but it's still big enough for great detail. So massive clear cockpit, opening hatch, removable weapons pods, maybe a tiny winch, maybe. The box art though, just slick. This Loach hovering just above the jungle foliage while Joe's rappelled down in wire mesh gear. Smoke rises in the background, and a Cobra something attempts to intercept. It's less bulky than the Huey, but its stealth speed and danger ramp up the imagination into full gear. All right, for our next one, we've got to go to a bit of a classic, even here in Australia. This thing is just ultra classic for our military. I'm talking about the F-111 Aardvark, or, we used to call it the Pig. All right, just close your eyes and picture this. A sleek jet with long swept back wings thundering just a couple of 100 feet above the jungle canopy, flying so low and fast it almost disappears into the terrain. That's the F-111, a plane that looked futuristic in the 60s. It flew combat missions in Vietnam and packed enough innovation to inspire every kid's imagination in the toy aisle. If Hasbro wanted a jet that could rival the Sky Striker but still stand apart, this would have been it. With variable sweep wings, huge payload capacity, and night-flying radar, the F-111 is the kind of aircraft that just screams G.I. Joe. This aircraft was built by General Dynamics, and that was like an aerospace powerhouse in the 60s. They just wanted to push aircraft design beyond traditional limits. Their big gamble was variable geometry wings, or swing wings, that could pivot in flight. Extended straight, they gave the F-111 lift for takeoff and cruising, but swept back, they turned it into a supersonic dart. That made the F-111 versatile in ways no jet before it could even claim. Now, while its Vietnam debut in '68 was rocky, it had some mechanical failures grounding some of the first aircraft. General Dynamics, being the good soldier, stuck with it. And by '72, the F-111 had proven itself a formidable long-range strike aircraft that could go places that no other US plane could reach safely. Now, when we talk about the capabilities for this aircraft, here's where the Aardvark or the Pig gets cool. First off, the swing wings. Every kid in the 80s would have lost their minds pulling a lever like we had on that Sky Striker to sweep the wings back and forth, turning one jet into two looks instantly. Now, in real life, that wasn't just a gimmick. It let the plane take off from short runways and then slice through the sky at Mach 2 once airborne. The Pig could carry up to 31,500 pounds of bombs. Absolutely insane. It's more than 3 times an F-4 Phantom's loadout. It had a terrain-following radar system that let it scream through valleys at treetop height, day or night, automatically adjusting altitude to hug the ground. Now, for a Joe toy, that would have been like having a built-in low attack mode. And that's a feature you could almost imagine Hasbro selling with a flip switch. And this wasn't a fragile bird either. With its side-by-side cockpit for 2 crew, an escape capsule that ejected the entire cockpit in an emergency, an internal bomb bay, the Aardvark was just as tough as it was futuristic. Now, to a 40-something Joe fan today, that's me, that's you, the cool factor is off the charts. It's sleek, mean, and packed with tricks that no other jet from Joe could match. Now, when we talk about missions for the pig, in Vietnam, they were about speed, stealth, and precision. The US Air Force used it for deep penetration bombing runs. They were the best, deep penetration. Slipping past radar defenses by flying low and fast in the dark. During Operation Linebacker 2 in 72, these pigs carried out some of the most dangerous night raids of the war, hitting targets others couldn't reach, all while taking minimal losses. Crews trusted the aardvark to do what other aircraft couldn't: break through the jungle weather, dodge surface-to-air missiles, and then drop bombs with accuracy under the cover of darkness. Now, while it never flew in huge numbers like the Phantom or the Iroquois, its missions were game changers, showing how technology could tilt the battlefield. That uniqueness makes it a perfect candidate for a Joe crossover. It's not the everyman aircraft, but it's the secret weapon you roll out when the mission just has to get done. Now, here's the debate. Does the pig fit Joe or Cobra? So on one hand, its real-world service makes it a natural Joe vehicle. All American innovation and advanced tech. But toy-wise, it has a bit of a sinister look. Sleek, aggressive, almost like something Cobra Commander would unveil as a bit of a terror weapon. Now, if Hasbro had made it, I can see it both ways. A standard release for the Joe team, maybe in classic green and grey, which is, pretty much the colours that we had here in Australia. And then a repaint for Cobra in jet black with blood red canopies, marketed as maybe Cobra's Night Fang or something equally dramatic like that. That kind of dual identity would have made it a hit across both sides. Now, we did see that a couple of times. We saw, a lot of Sky Patrol did that. But yeah. Now, who would pilot it? Who do you reckon? So the obvious choice is Ace, branching out to another jet from the Sky Striker. But the two-seat cockpit gives us more options. Imagine Ace in the front, Slipstream, or a brand new character in the back seat, or in the side seat, as it would be, running radars and weapons. It could have been Hasbro's chance to introduce a specialised electronic warfare or bomber pilot. Now, if Cobra got the repaint, Wild Weasel would have been the perfect fit. His sinister look, it just matches the pig's sharp profile. The box art practically draws itself. Ace and a co-pilot blasting through jungle valleys. Wings swept back, bombs dropping on a Cobra base. And on the Cobra version, in black and crimson, streaking over the ocean with Wild Weasel at the stick, tracer fire just chasing it from below. And either way, it's a visual showstopper. Now, on the toy shelf, this thing would have been massive. Huge. Bigger than most of the Joe jets, but smaller than the US flag or Defiant, obviously. But it would have dominated the mid-size box range. If you can picture it, artwork showing the wings extended and take off on one panel, then swept back in supersonic dash mode on the other. Explosions in the background, tracer fire slashing the night sky. Joe's or Cobra's visible through that canopy. Now, this would have been the kind of toy you beg for at Christmas. Not just a plane, but a shape-shifting marvel with wings you can move by hand, a bomb bay that opened, because I know you were sitting there thinking, well, that's what we had with the Sky Striker. A bomb bay that opened and space for two figures in the cockpit. On the shelf would have stood apart from the Sky Striker as the futuristic strike jet of the line, and it would have been the one that kids would have remembered decades later. Now, I just want to take this quick opportunity to say to you guys, if you've reached this far in the video, please go check out my channel members section for a nothing thing of $1.60 US a month. You're going to get 2 to 3 extra videos a week, and they're going to be based on a whole bunch of different toy lines. So yeah, go check it out. All right, next up, we're going to talk about another personal favorite of mine. I love this thing, the F4 Phantom 2. If there's one aircraft that just symbolizes the Vietnam War in the skies, it's this thing, the Phantom. This was the brute force jet, twin engines, two crew, and a reputation for speed, noise, and sheer presence. The Phantom wasn't sleek and elegant like a MiG, and it didn't have swing wings like the Pig. It was raw power strapped to a rocket, and it could dogfight, bomb, and intercept all in the same day, making it one of the most versatile jets ever flown. Now, in a G.I. Joe toy line, it would have been the no-nonsense workhorse fighter, a counterpart to the flashy Sky Striker, a machine built for grit and firepower. This thing would have been amazing as a toy. The Phantom was built by McDonnell Aircraft. They later become McDonnell Douglas, and they are one of the premier US aerospace companies of the Cold War. First flown in 1958, the F-4 was designed as a Navy fleet defender, but quickly spread to the Air Force and Marines, becoming the backbone of US air power throughout Vietnam. McDonnell Douglas produced over 5,000 Phantoms, making it one of the most prolific jet fighters of the 20th century. Their contribution wasn't just about one mission type. They provided an all-rounder that could just do everything. And they built it in staggering numbers. If Bell Helicopter owned the helicopter war, McDonnell Douglas owned the jet war at the time. And when we look at capabilities for the Phantom, what made the Phantom cool is just its raw muscle. Two General Electric J79 turbojet engines gave it nearly 36,000 pounds of thrust, enough to push the jet past Mach 2 over 1,400 miles per hour. Its climb rate was insane, and its payload was massive. It could haul 18,000 pounds of bombs, rockets, or missiles on 9 hardpoints. And unlike many aircraft of its day, the Phantom carried both air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles, AIM-7 Sparrows, AIM-9 Sidewinders, bombs, rockets, even a centerline gun pod once the Air Force realized that it needed one. Now, with two crew that consisted of a pilot and a radar intercept officer, it could fight in almost any scenario. But what really sets the Phantom apart in the cool factor category is its reputation. Veterans describe it as a loud, smoky, and aggressive aircraft, nicknamed the Smoker because of its exhaust trail. This was the jet that roared into battle, shook the ground, and scared the hell out of enemies. Now, to a Joe fan today, the Phantom just looks mean, like a bulldog with wings. When we look at missions this thing flew, it flew almost every type of mission in Vietnam that a jet could. As a bomber, it hit supply lines and enemy bases in North Vietnam. As a fighter, it escorted strike packages and went head-to-head with MiGs in dogfights, where it became the backbone of US air superiority. It also flew reconnaissance missions, close air support, and even wild weasel suppression of enemy air defenses. Now, by the end of the war, the Phantom had flown hundreds of thousands of sorties and scored the majority of US air-to-air kills against MiG-17s, MiG-19s, and MiG-21s. It was versatile, reliable, and tough. Exactly the kind of aircraft that earned its place in history. Now, in toy terms, that's pure play value. One jet that could be your bomber, your dogfighter, and your recon bird all in one. Now, this one to me feels firmly like a Joe vehicle. The Phantom was the standard bearer of US air power in Vietnam, so it makes sense for G.I. Joe to have this thing. But I can also see Hasbro pulling a clever move, release it in US markings for Joe, and then repaint it in black, silver, or blue as a Cobra version, mimicking how real-world Phantoms serve with dozens of nations worldwide. That repaint potential alone would have made it a goldmine. Now, who would pilot this thing? For G.I. Joe, Ace is the natural choice. But since this is a two-seater, it once again opens the space up for partnerships. So let's look at maybe Ace in the front with Slipstream in the back, or even a new character specifically designed as a Phantom Radar Intercept Officer. Now, for Cobra, Wild Weasel would be the obvious pilot and repainted Phantom, maybe alongside a new co pilot figure with a sinister call sign like Blackout or Crosshair. But the box art writes itself. A Phantom screaming through the sky, missile streaking towards a MiG, trace of fire flashing around it. See the Joes through the canopy or the Cobra repaint blasting the ocean, black paint glinting. Cobra insignia bold on the tail. It would have been one of the most striking jets in the line. It would have been a pretty big box toy, almost as long as the Sky Striker, but bulkier, chunkier, meaner silhouette. Now, on shelves, it would have stood out as the roughneck of the Joe Air Fleet, the brawler jet compared to the sleeker Sky Striker. Hasbro could have played up the swing of its role, one day a bomber, the next a dogfighter, and given kids a plane that felt like three toys in one. So if you imagine a jungle air base in the background, a Phantom screaming down low with bombs falling, Joe's leaping into action on the ground, you got that Hawk leading the run in, or the Cobra version in a menacing dark scheme, flying in formation with rattlers. That's a shelf presence that commands attention, both in 84 and on a collector's wall today. All right, next up, another one of my personal favorites. And I want to say we're going to eventually hit non-aircraft. It's probably what you can expect from an Air Force guy to try and show you a whole bunch of aircraft, but we're getting there. We're getting there, boys. So next up, we're looking at the A6 Intruder. Now, not every aircraft in Vietnam was built to be sleek and glamorous, all right? Some were built to be tough, reliable, and absolutely devastating when it comes to firepower. And that's the A6 Intruder for me. A carrier-based attack jet designed to deliver bombs in any weather, day or night. The Intruder was the workforce of US Navy strike missions. Now, if the Phantom was the brawler in the skies, the A6 was the bruiser that crept in low and just smashed targets when nobody else could. Now, for a G.I. Joe fan, this would have been the perfect strike jet, heavier, meaner, and visually distinct from the Sky Striker. It's not about flashy dogfights, it's about getting the job done. And if you were one of the lucky kids who had the USS Flag, imagine landing this beast right on the carrier deck. That's instant play pattern magic. So the Intruder came from Grumman, the same company that gave us the F-14 Tomcat, aka the Sky Striker. Grumman had a reputation for building ironworks, so tough, carrier-proof aircraft that could take punishment and still fly home. The A6 first flew in 1960 and entered service in 63. And unlike other jets, it was never meant to be a fighter. It was a pure attack aircraft. But what made Grumman's contribution so special was their focus on all-weather avionics, radar, terrain following systems, and navigation computers that let the Intruder fly missions when other jets were grounded. And that made them invaluable in Vietnam. And it cemented Grumman as one of the most important Navy contractors of the Cold War era. Now, when we talk about capabilities for the Intruder, here's why the Intruder is cool. First off, it carried a ridiculous payload, up to 18,000 pounds of bombs, missiles, or rockets, almost as much as the Phantom. But it was on a smaller frame. It had a side-by-side cockpit for two crew, a pilot, and a bombardier navigator, which gave it a distinctive wide-nose profile. It wasn't fast compared to fighters, maxing out at just under Mach 1, but speed wasn't its job. This thing was not a dogfighter. It was built for endurance, low altitude penetration, and precision strike. Its radar and navigation suite meant it could fly through storms, clouds, or pitch black night and still drop ordnance on the target. Now, in toy terms, that's a gimmick dream. Folding carrier wings, big swinging bomb racks, an opening canopy for 2 figures, and maybe even a working bomb bay. And add that to the fact that it's carrier capable, and suddenly you've got a Joe toy that pairs perfectly with the flag. That combo alone would have made it legendary in the line. Now, for missions, the Intruder earned its reputation flying strike missions over North Vietnam, often in the worst conditions possible. It was the jet that launched into monsoon weather when Phantoms and Skyhawks stayed grounded. It flew low altitude night raids, slipped under radar, and hammered enemy supply lines and bases. A6s took part in Operation Rolling Thunder, which was 65 to 68, and then later in Linebacker 1 and 2 in 72, where they delivered precision strikes that shaped the air campaign. They weren't glamorous dogfighters, but ask anyone who served on a carrier in Vietnam, and they'll tell you the Intruder was the Navy's backbone strike aircraft of that era. Now, Cobra or Joe? Let's go with it, Joe. The Intruder was the Navy's bread and butter, and it fits Joe's identity perfectly. Rugged, versatile, dependable. But that said, Hasbro, like the other ones, could have done a Cobra repaint later. Black and crimson with shark teeth on the front. Marketed as Cobra's Night something. But the default version belongs firmly in the Joe hangar. Now, who would pilot it? Ace. But once again, it's a 2-seater. So it gives us a chance to introduce a new pairing. You'd need a pilot and a bombardier navigator figure. So imagine Ace flying alongside a brand new character, maybe codenamed Vector or Deadeye, and that would be a homage to the bombing runs. Now on the box art, I can see an Intruder sweeping low over a Cobra jungle fortress, bombs dropping from its wings, tracer flyer streaking past, or a carrier deck scene on the USS Flag, and that's what I'd be really excited to see. Just thinking about that Intruder just roaring off the catapult while Joe's cheer from the deck. Now, for kids in the 80s, that would have been pure magic. And I think for adults in their late 40s, it's also a bit of magic. In toy form, the Intruder would have been big but not massive. Probably about the same footprint as the Sky Striker, but chunkier, with a distinctive wide nose. The box art could highlight its folding carrier wings and bomb load, maybe showing it taxiing on the Flag's deck in one scene and blasting targets in another. On shelves, it would have stood out because it looked different. That wide, flat nose, side-by-side cockpit and bulky bomb racks that gave it a silhouette unlike any other Joe jet. It would have been the kind of vehicle you remembered because it didn't look like any of the other jets. It looked like a workhorse, a bruiser, kind of jet that gets the job done. Now, the A6 may not have the flash of a Phantom or a futuristic vibe of Aardvark, but that's exactly why it deserves a spot on this list. It was the Navy's backbone strike jet, built tough, flowing hard, and trusted to deliver when nothing else could. For G.I. Joe, it would have been the perfect complement to the Sky Striker. Less glamorous, more dependable, but just as cool on the toy shelf. And for the lucky few kids who had the Flag, this bird would have made the carrier feel complete. All right, now on to something else. Let's do some ground vehicles. We're looking specifically at this time at the M551 Sheridan light tank. So let's have a think about it. Close your eyes again and picture a lightweight tank splashing out of a riverbank in Vietnam, aluminium armor glinting, a squat 152mm gun pointing forwards. It's not the hulking Sherman of World War II or the massive Abrahams of today. This is a compact, high-tech little beast designed to be airdropped straight into combat. and that's the M551 Sheridan. Now, for Joe collectors, the Sheridan would have been the perfect small to mid-sized armor piece. The Mobat gave kids a big tank, but the Sheridan would have added variety, a light, quick strike vehicle with a very different silhouette. It's no armadillo. It's not that small, bit bigger, but still quick strike. And it's the kind of tank you can imagine Hasbro producing as a play-friendly alternative to the Mobat with tons of cross-play potential. Now, the Sheridan was developed by General Motors' Cadillac division in the 60s. Cadillac had already designed the M41 Walker Bulldog light tank, but the Army wanted something even lighter, a vehicle that airborne divisions could airdrop into battle and still pack a serious punch. Cadillac's solution was radical, a lightweight aluminium, not aluminum, hull to cut weight, and a massive 152mm gun/launcher that could fire both conventional rounds and the new guided missile that was just developed. It was a bold design that pushed boundaries, and while the Sheridan had its flaws, Cadillac delivered a unique machine that gave US forces a tank that they could deploy almost anywhere, including the jungles of Vietnam. Now, when we look at the capabilities of the Sheridan, its claim to fame was its blend of lightweight and big firepower. It weighed just 15 tons, about a third of an Abrams. It could be airdropped or ferried by helicopter. Its aluminium armor wasn't invincible, but it was enough to protect against small arms and shrapnel. The centerpiece, though, was its 152mm gun launcher, capable of firing massive shells or these guided Shillelagh missiles. In practice, the missile system was finicky, but the sheer presence of that huge gun on such a small tank made the Sheridan look mean. It also had amphibious capability. With a flotation screen, it could swim across rivers. Now, in toy terms, this thing would have been fantastic. A turreted light tank you could lift with one hand with a spring-loaded missile launcher standing in for the guided missile system, rolling tracks, and maybe even a removable flotation screen as a gimmick. Smaller than the Mobat, but bigger than the Armadillo, it would have filled a perfect niche in the Joe vehicle lineup. And when we look at missions for the Sheridan, it entered combat in Vietnam in '69 with the 11th Armored Cavalry Unit. Its lightweight and mobility made it well suited for patrols, convoy escorts, and quick strikes through terrain too tough for heavier armor. Crews liked its speed and firepower, but it was vulnerable to mines and RPGs, and its thin armor meant it couldn't slug it out with heavy enemy weapons. But still, the Sheridan gave the US forces an armored punch where otherwise they had none. It became a symbol of the late war period, rumbling through rice paddies and jungles in places you wouldn't expect to see a tank at all. And it's that uniqueness, a light tank dropped into Vietnam, that makes it stand out in history, and it makes it a perfect fit for a G.I. Joe what if. Now, this is absolutely a Joe vehicle. The Sheridan was used by the US Army and fits right into the Joe ethos of versatility and mobility. But like all these, it would also look amazing with a repaint down the line. Black and crimson with Cobra logos, marketed as some type of Cobra strike tank. Its small size makes it an easy candidate for a redeco. And still, at its heart, the Sheridan is Joe through and through. So who would pilot this thing? Well, Steeler, of course, is the obvious pick. The Joe Tank Commander come packaged with the Mobat. But because the Sheridan is lighter, you can imagine Hasbro assigning it to someone like Heavy Metal, or even creating a new light armor specialist. A new Joe codenamed Sheridan or Dropfire would have been a great tie-in figure. Hell, I can even see Sarge piloting this thing. So the box art almost paints itself for this. The Sheridan bursting through the jungle foliage. It's big gun firing. Joe's riding on the hull. tracer fire whizzing past, or let's put it on to the flag and have it being airlifted by a tomahawk in the background. As a toy, it would have been the kind of mid-price armor vehicle every kid could get, just not just the lucky few here, the giant Mobat. On the shelf, the Sheridan would have been a mid-sized box, maybe in the $10 to $12 range in the 80s. Small enough to be accessible, but big enough to feel substantial. And that wide turret and oversized gun would have made it stand out from the Mobat's sleeker profile. And with its amphibious gimmick, Hasbro could have even included a water play feature, a big selling point for backyard battles at the time. It wouldn't have had the towering presence of the Mobat, but its uniqueness would have made it memorable. So think of it as the Joe tank you could actually carry to a friend's house, ready for battle, without needing a whole backpack to haul it. This thing wasn't perfect, but it was bold. A lightweight tank with heavy firepower, and it gave US forces a unique edge in Vietnam. And it would have given G.I. Joe fans a totally different kind of armor on the toy shelf. Smaller, more mobile, but still packing a punch. The Sheridan would have been the Joe vehicle that kids could take anywhere. And in my mind, that makes it a no-brainer for this list. Now, next up, we're going to look at a bit of a weird one. I wanted something on this list that wasn't firepower. Now, when I thought about this, I thought about the bridge layer, and I thought this would be a great accompaniment to that kind of vehicle. So right now, we're talking about the M88 Hercules Armored Recovery Vehicle. Now, every battlefield needs its unsung heroes, right? The machines that keep the fight going. In Vietnam, when a tank bogged down in mud, hit a mine, or broke under jungle strain, this Hercules rolled in. It wasn't glamorous like a phantom screaming through the skies or an Iroquois swooping in into a hot landing zone, but it was the lifeline, the brute force rescue machine that kept armor in the fight. And for G.I. Joe, the M88 would have been a fantastic addition to the line because it's different. Instead of another gun-bristling combat vehicle, it would have been a recovery beast, a tracked powerhouse with a crane, a winch, and the kind of play features that scream backyard fun. Every kid knows the joy of hooking up a stranded toy and hauling it home. And that's what this vehicle is built for. Now, the M88 was built by Bowen McLaughlin York, later become BMY, which eventually become a part of BAE Systems. Their specialty wasn't flashy tanks, but practical support vehicles that armies desperately needed. First introduced in the 60s, the M88 was designed to recover and repair broken down or battle-damaged tanks. And instead of a cannon, it carried a massive winch, a 35-ton capacity crane, and a bulldozer blade. Now, in Vietnam, where terrain and enemy fire chewed up armor daily, the M88 was indispensable. And that's a prolific contribution, not by destroying the enemy, but by making sure your own armor can continue to roll. Now, when we look at the capabilities, here's where the M88 shines. It weighed nearly 60 tons, and it had a powerful V12 engine, giving it the muscle to tow a disabled tank off the field. The 35-ton crane could lift engines or turrets clear off vehicles, while the winch could drag a stuck tank out of a swamp. And then that bulldozer blade let it clear obstacles or dig in for stability during heavy lifts. Now, from a toy's perspective, this would have been amazing. A working winch with a hook to tow your Mobat, because we all know how many vehicles had tow points. A removable crane arm to repair the vehicles, and a bulldozer blade that kids could push through dirt or sand, or Cobra vehicles. Now, it's one of those rare military vehicles where the real world functions translate directly into kids' play patterns. No imagination leap needed here. It's just baked right in. The fun is there. Now, when we look at the missions, I'm sure you can guess it was simple but vital. Recovery and repair. That's it. It escorted tank units ready to pull a Sheridan or an M48 Patton out of the mud or back from the front lines. It recovered vehicles hit by mines, repaired engines in the field, and it cleared obstacles with that blade. Crews who operated M88s often described them as the guardian angels of the Armoured Corps. They weren't on the front line shooting, but without them, the armour fight would grind to a halt. Now, that sense of behind the scenes heroism just makes the M88 special. It's not about the glory of combat, but about saving the day when things go wrong. Now, this one feels 100% like a Joe vehicle. It's the dependable, practical blue collar hero of the motor pool. Cobra was about flashy terror weapons, and they'd just never fielded anything like this. They didn't really do anything or have anything that would support their assets. But the Joes absolutely fits their identity perfectly. A rugged recovery vehicle keeping the team's tanks and APCs rolling into battle. Now, for the Joes, this would have been a perfect match for a character like Steeler, Heavy Metal, or even a new motor pool specialist of some type. Hasbro could have easily created a Joe mechanic figure, codenamed something like Grease Monkey or Toe Line, who could have come packed with this vehicle. Now imagine a figure like your cover girl with a wrench, a welding torch accessory, maybe even a removable helmet with a visor. Some kind of fix-it guy. On the box art, you can easily see it, right? M88 towing a damaged Mobat out of a jungle swamp, Joe standing guard with rifles as Cobra forces press the attack. The crane raised high, the winch pulling tight, and the vehicle straining with power. It would have looked heroic in a very different way than the flashy combat toys. In toy form, the M88 would have been chunky, heavy, and full of moving parts. A lot of strings, enough that the crane would work. You could just imagine that blade on the front. It would have been moving anyway. And it's all that stuff that would have given it the unmatched playability. It wouldn't be the centerpiece of jets and tanks and stuff, but it would have been one of those toys that every kid loved because it added realism to the battles. And on the shelf, it would have stood out as something unique. No giant cannons, no wings, just a presence all of its own. Kids who already had the Mobat or the Wolverine would need the M88 to complete their motor pool. And collectors today would go nuts for it because it fills that niche that Hasbro never touched, the support vehicle that makes the fantasy more believable. So, the M88, it didn't win battles by itself, but it sure made sure that battles weren't lost by breakdowns. And in Vietnam, it was the lifeline for US armor, always ready to haul a tank out of trouble and get it back in the fight. Now, for G.I. Joe, it would have been a one-of-a-kind toy. Not glamorous, but fun, rugged, and packed with play features in a line defined by its imagination. The M88 would have been the kind of vehicle that made the whole collection come alive. All right, we've had enough of the land vehicles. Let's hit the naval vehicles. And, we're almost at the end of the list. I wanted to chuck in some cool Navy assets. And, mate, there's no cooler Navy asset than the PBR or Patrol Boat Riverine. It was often just called a pipper. So if the Iroquois was the sound of Vietnam from the skies, then the pibber was its shadow on the rivers. These small, fast patrol boats carved through the Mekong Delta, bristling with guns and crewed by sailors who were part warrior, part survivalist. Now, for G.I. Joe, the PBR would have been an absolute gem of a vehicle. A watercraft smaller than the whale, but loaded with weapons. Perfect for backyard crick battles. Did I say that right? Crick. Or bathtub missions. Imagine the joy of dropping it into a pool and seeing it skim across, manned by your favourite Joes. You got Shipwreck and Wetsuit, and they're all up on there. It's kind of play pattern this vehicle was just made for. The PBR wasn't made by a tank or an aircraft giant. It was built by civilian boat manufacturers contracted by the US Navy, like United Boat Builders in Bellingham, Washington. These were fiberglass boats, about 31 feet long, powered by twin diesel engines with water jet propulsion. They weren't armoured. Speed and agility were their defence. The Navy needed thousands of them for river patrols, interdiction missions, and support in Vietnam's labyrinth of waterways. And the small boat builders delivered in droves. Now, what makes the PBR cool is its mix of speed, firepower, and rugged simplicity. These boats could hit speeds of 28 to 30 knots, which is about 35 miles per hour on the water. And thanks to their water jet drive, they could skim through just a couple of feet of water, perfect for river deltas and shallow canals. They were armed to the teeth for their size. Twin M2 50 cal machine guns up front, an M60 on the side, sometimes a Mark 19 automatic grenade launcher, or even a 20 millimeter cannon in the back. Exciting to think about. Crews often customized them further with whatever weapons they could scrounge as well. And from a toy perspective, this would have been irresistible. Rotating gun turrets, removable machine guns, side-mounted grenade launchers, plus the simple fun of floating in real water. It would have been the perfect mid-sized watercraft to complement the whale or the moray in the Joe versus Cobra naval battles. Now, when we talk about missions, in Vietnam, the PBR's job was to own the rivers. That's it, just own them. They patrolled the Mekong Delta, intercepting supplies, engaging enemy sampans, and supporting ground troops along the waterways. These were dangerous missions. PBR crews often faced ambushes, mines, and hidden enemy fire from the shore. They also ran insertion and extraction missions for SEAL teams, slipping in at night to deliver or recover small units. And this gave the PBR a reputation for daring high-risk operations. The kind of missions you could imagine Snake Eyes or Stalker riding shotgun on in the Joe universe. Now, this one also screams Joe vehicle to me. The PBR's mission profile, which is patrol, insertion, interdiction, fits the Joe team's identity perfectly. But, repaints, maybe all black with crimson guns, marketed as, I don't know, a Cobra River Raider or something like that. But yeah, mostly belongs in a Joe dock. Now, piloting this thing, it would probably be Cutter. He'd be a natural crossover. Navy guy with river patrol experience. Shipwreck would also be a pretty good match. Yeah, I reckon Shipwreck's probably your dude. Manning the guns with, the roughneck sailor vibe. But Hasbro could have easily just introduced a new figure with this thing, Delta or River Rat or something like that. Give him a bandana, sunglasses, and a life jacket, and it's good to go. On the box art, you'd probably have the boat carving through a jungle river, guns blazing in all directions, tracer fire, splashing water around it while SEAL-style Joes, so maybe torpedo and wetsuit, crouching on the deck at this thing. And that's just pure Vietnam energy wrapped up in Joe packaging. On the shelves, the PBR would have been a mid-sized vehicle, smaller than the whale, bigger than the devilfish. Its profile, low, wide, bristling with guns, it just would have set it apart instantly from other vehicles. Kids would have loved the fact that it actually floated as well, and Hasbro could have leaned hard into that in the marketing. Now, just picture the box, right? Cutter at the helm, shipwreck firing an M60 off the side, just pumping away at that thing. Snake Eyes crouched near the bow, and that boat just tearing through jungle waters while Cobra Troopers firing from the banks. It would have looked explosive, alive, and impossible to ignore in a toy aisle. Now, this thing might not have been the biggest or flashiest vehicle in Vietnam, but it was definitely one of the most iconic. I mean, just fast, mean, and just loaded with firepower. It owned the rivers and it supported the missions that nobody else could. For G.I. Joe, it would have been the perfect complement to the Whale and the Moray, a smaller, scrappier gunboat for the tight, dangerous battles. For kids in the 80s, it would have been a dream to float in a pool or creek and bring those river battles to life. All right, as we roll back down into the end of this list, let's take a look at a thing called a LARC V. So LARC standing for Lighter Amphibious Resupply Cargo. And when you think of Vietnam, it's easy to picture helicopters, jets, and tanks, right? The fight also played out on the rivers and beaches, and that's where the LARC V come in. You would have seen this thing. You know this thing. You're looking at the pictures right now, and you're like, why wasn't this thing made for Joe's? Now, this thing brought the fight to the rivers and the beaches. And that's where the LARC V come in, right? Part truck, part boat. Its amphibious hauler was as funky as it was useful. So just imagine a massive four-wheeled vehicle rumbling straight off the sand into the surf and then powering through the water like a boat. For G.I. Joe, this would have been gold. Now, the Whale gave us hovercraft, and the PBR would have been your scrappy gunboat, but the LARC V would have been the utility bruiser, a cargo carrier, troop transport, and amphibious oddball rolled all into one. Exactly the kind of unique vehicle that stands out in the Joe toy line. The LARC family was built by Ingersoll and other contractors in the 50s and 60s with several different versions. There was the Little LARC, which was a 1.5 tonner, the mid-size LARC, which was the 5 tonner, and then the LARC LX, which was the 60 tonner. And then, didn't stop there, the Monster LARC LX, the 100-ton version. And the LARC V became the most widely used in Vietnam, with hundreds deployed by the US Army. They were not glamorous war machines. They were designed to do the hard work of logistics. In Vietnam, where rivers, beaches, and swamps made resupply a nightmare, the LARC V proved invaluable. And that's the beauty of it. The Army needed something ugly but effective, and these builders delivered a vehicle that could just literally go anywhere. So this thing was a beast of practicality. On land, it could carry 5 tons of cargo in its open bed, trundling along rough terrain on massive tires. It hit the water and its diesel engine drove a water jet, propelling it at about 8 to 10 knots. Not fast, but steady. And crews often loaded it with ammo, food, fuel, or even more troops, and then just drove it straight into the Mekong or up onto a muddy bank. From a toy perspective, this one is a no-brainer. A rolling amphibious truck that you can literally drive into a pool or a sandbox, loaded with Joes. Just picture it with working wheels, a flip-down ramp, and pegs for figures to stand in the cargo bed. It's by no means flashy, but it's the kind of toy that becomes the backbone of every kid's battles. Now, in Vietnam, the LARC was all about resupply and mobility, right? It hauled cargo up rivers, delivered ammunition to fire bases, ferried troops across swamps, and even evacuated wounded when the helicopters weren't available. It wasn't armored though, so it needed escorts, but its ability to cross from land to water seamlessly made it an unsung hero of the logistical war. And for US forces, it meant freedom of movement and terrain that just ate trucks alive and made traditional boats useless. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the war machine moving. Now, this would have been a Joe vehicle, hands down. The Joes always had the functional, practical gear. The vehicles have felt rooted in reality. And the Lark's utility role just screams G.I. Joe. But that said, once again, repaints. Give it a black hull, red trim, slap a turret on the back, and suddenly you've got a Cobra amphibious assault craft. But yeah, pure form, Joe vehicle. Now, for a driver for this thing, could have used toll booths, or probably just make a new character. Someone with maybe a naval engineering specialty, codename something like Cargo or Mud Skipper. Just go nuts with the name. The box art almost writes itself. The Lark storming onto a beachhead, front tires churn and sand, Cobra forces firing from the shore, while Joe's returning fire from the open bed of this thing. Or more utility theme box with the Lark loaded with gear and troops, just showing off its play value. Now on the shelf, this thing would have been a mid to large vehicle, sized between the Havoc and the Whale. It's oddball design, big wheels, boat hull body, open cargo deck, would have made it instantly eye-catching. And I reckon if you saw this thing on the shelf, you would just be drawn to it, purely out of that oddity thing. As a toy in your lounge room, it would have encouraged imaginative play. Load it with figures, drive it across the living room floor, and then splash it into the kiddie pool for a waterborne assault. It's just got that cross environment versatility that makes it stand out. And for Joe kids, it would have been the ultimate backyard war vehicle. It's just the one that could go anywhere your imagination took it. Now, this thing definitely was not as famous as a Huey or a Phantom, but it's one of those vehicles that defined the Vietnam battlefield. Tough, weird, and incredibly versatile. It gave US forces the ability to move supplies where nobody thought it was possible. And for G.I. Joe, it would have been an amazing addition. A toy that felt different from everything else on the shelf, bridging land and water in a way that no other vehicle did. The Whale may get all the glory, look at me, I'm a hovercraft. But the Lark would have been the kid's secret favorite. Just that rugged, ambitious, amphibious hauler that could do it all. All right, we've reached the end of the list. And in the last spot, and by no means prioritised that way, we're looking at the PCF. It's a swift boat. And PCF standing for Patrol Craft Fast. Now, if the PBR was the scrappy jungle fighter of the rivers, then the swift boat was its bigger, tougher cousin out on the coastlines. It was longer, heavier, and built for patrols where the rivers met the sea. These swift boats becoming the most defining images of the Vietnam War. They weren't glamorous destroyers or carriers. They were workhorses that carried sailors into the thick of the fight, day in and day out. Now, for G.I. Joe, the swift boat would have been a natural mid-sized naval vehicle, smaller than the Whale, but larger and more structured than the PBR. It's a kind of boat that would have added variety to Joe's naval arsenal and given kids a totally different type of waterborne play. Now, these swift boats were designed and built by Seward Seacraft. They're a civilian shipbuilder out of Louisiana, and it was in response to the Navy's need for a shallow draft patrol craft. At just 50 feet long, they were big enough to carry a crew and serious armament, but they were small enough to operate in Vietnam's deltas and coastal shallows. Seward churned out over 200 of these things during the war, delivering a vessel that gave the Navy exactly what it needed: speed, firepower, and adaptability in tight waters. Now, the swift boat wasn't just about speed, all right? 28 knots, about 32 miles per hour, was quick enough for coastal chase missions. But what made it cool was its armament and versatility. So it carried twin 50 cal machine guns in a turret above the pilot house, plus additional M60s, grenade launchers, and even an 81mm mortar that had a 50 cal piggybacked on top. It just made this thing a floating fortress. It could carry dozen or so sailors, SEALs, Marines, whatever, inserting small teams ashore and then cover them with heavy fire. Now, toy-wise, that thing is a dream. Rotating gun turrets, removable mortars, firing rocket launchers, plus plenty of deck space for the figures. And unlike the sleek whale, this would have felt like a gritty, hard-edged war boat, the kind that kids would just pile Joes onto a last stand at the water. Now, for the missions, these things were all about patrol and interdiction. They prowled Vietnam's coastline, searching for enemy supply boats, and they darted up rivers to disrupt Viet Cong traffic. They inserted SEALs under cover of darkness. They supported ground troops near shorelines, and they returned fire against ambushes launched from riverbanks. Perhaps most famously, the Swiftboats become symbols of the Brown Water Navy, sailors operating the most dangerous and unpredictable parts of the war. They weren't capital ships, they were up-close fighters, taking fire and dishing it out at point-blank range. And that kind of grit makes them one of the most iconic Vietnam craft to serve. Now, like most of these things, it feels like a Joe vehicle. The Swiftboat's real-life service makes it a natural fit for the Joe's naval roster. But, like any of these things, we could have seen the Cobra version, some kind of pirate-style raider bristling with heavier guns. But its DNA, which is reliability, versatility, and American built, marks it as Joe through and through. So the obvious Joe for a pilot for this is Cutter. But yeah, you would think you'd see some type of dedicated Brown Water Navy vehicle. Imagine a new Joe, codename Skipper or Delta King or something like that. And that dude would have some pretty intense river combat experience. It'd have supporting crew, would be shipwreck on deck gunnery, wetsuit man in the mortar, and a SEAL team fast roping off the stern. Now on Boxard, you'd have the Swift boat charging up a jungle river, traces, Cobra gunboats exploding off the side. And that's the kind of scene that would sell the shit out of this vehicle. On the shelves, this Swift boat would have been a large vehicle, probably just under the whale in footprint size, I reckon. To have it's got the tall pilot house, the mounted turret, and open deck full of guns. Just would have given it a dramatic profile in the toy aisle. It would have been one of those vehicles that didn't just look like a toy, it looked like an adventure. You can imagine kids just loading this thing up with 6 or 7 Joes, cruising across the pool or the bathtub, and staging night rides with the guns bristling. The Boxer could show both roles, naval interdiction at sea or close quarters combat on a river. And just, I reckon that it would just make it clear that it's not just any boat, it was a centerpiece for the Joe Navy vessels. This thing was easily one of the most iconic vessels of Vietnam's waterways. It was big enough to carry real firepower, small enough to fight in the deltas. It gave sailors a dangerous but vital role in the war. And for G.I. Joe, it would have been an incredible toy. Just rugged, versatile, and packed with weapons. It would have fit right alongside the Whale and the Moray as a must-have naval vehicle. And for the lucky kid who got it, this would have been the boat that carried every backyard mission to victory. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed those 10 absolute banger vehicles that served in the Vietnam War. I would have loved if we had any of those sitting in the vintage toy line for Joe. Just would have been amazing to be able to play with today. Guys, thank you so much for getting to this point of the video. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and sub if you're not sub, please. But yeah, otherwise, thank you so much for making this far. And until the next video, stay frosty. Bye-bye.